Welcome to the MMHP in the 989, channeling all styles and eras of Michigan music history.
Hello, Michigan music lovers. This is Scott Baker. I want to welcome you to the Michigan Music History Podcast. I am flanked by Michigan music royalty. To the left, Dr. J. To the right, Sir Fred. We cut from just around the block of the Michigan Rock Legends Hall of Fame in Bay City, Michigan, here at Studio 163 in Essexville. And now it's time to grab a favorite beverage, hit the cruise, and take a trip back with us through Michigan's rich music history.
This podcast is sponsored by our friends at Electric Kitsch, located at 2106 Kosciuszko Avenue in Bay City, Michigan. And now, here's your host, Scott Baker.
Well, here we are at Studio 163 in Essexville on our first cold December, snow out of the blue in the mid-afternoon, weirdo winter day here. How you doing, Dr. J?
Doing great. Yeah, that was a big surprise.
Come out of nowhere.
Yeah, they didn't predict that snowstorm on our weather forecast. Yeah, it was pretty slippery out there this afternoon.
Oh, man, it's crazy driving tonight. Sir Fred, how you doing?
I'm doing real good.
Good. I'm glad everybody made it safe in here. We got a special guest, Mr. Kevin Cole in the house. How you doing, Kevin?
Not bad.
He's Essexville's own and a mid-Michigan phenomenal keyboard player. Comes back for the state theater shows every year, but now he's kind of living around here again.
I am.
What's going on, man?
Well, my mom was really sick for a number of years, like say a 3-4 year period, while I'd been in Chicago. Well, at that point, I'd been in Chicago probably 19 years. And, I make that 5-hour drive like it's nothing, after all that time. But I was driving up here so much, I thought, I'm only going to Chicago to get on a plane, play a concert with some orchestra, get back to Chicago, stay overnight in my apartment, and then I'm back up here. So I said, well, maybe instead of paying all that rent, I should save a little money for a year or two. Because, things are about half price here as compared to Chicago. And so I moved back. Well, little did I know when I moved back in June of 2016 that by November of 2016, my dad, who was as healthy as a horse, he dies. And my mom, who everyone thought was going to die, she's thriving and doing fantastic at the age of 90 now. So that changed the game plan. Because my dad saw his exit. He goes, oh, good, Kevin can be the taxi driver. Because I have an older brother at home. He doesn't drive. My mom never drove. And I thought, thanks a lot, Dad. I'm going to get you for that. But anyway, so it's turned into 5 years. But it's not bad because we have a nice little airport. They still have to fly me if they want me to play, concerts wherever on the planet. And I value the time I'm having with my mom. Because she's really with it. In fact, she's almost too with it. I think I said to one doctor, I said, is there a pill where I can give her dementia just for a day? I just need a day, okay? Because she's like reminding me of stuff like I'm still in school. And when I say, Mom, you know how old I am? I'm still the mother. I said, oh. She goes, I'm going to live to be 120. I said, you would do that to me, wouldn't you? But anyway, it's fun. It's really fun. And of course, since I've been back, I've been very active with Bay City Players, especially, because that's where I cut my musical teeth when I was 8 years old. That's another story. And then I did the first musical down at the new band show at Winona Park this summer with Bay City Players and my cohort in crime, director Leedsburg. We did Godspell, and it was a big hit, and had its own challenges. I mean, doing stuff outside, as you probably well know. Yeah. But since it was Godspell, I thought, well, if it's a show about God, and if he makes it rain any of the 4 performances, this is on him. Okay? We're doing this for you. Okay? So anyway, that's just in a nutshell. And how long I'll still be here, I don't know. I mean, eventually, it would be nice to go back to Chicago or out to New York because I've been working on original musicals and, want to get some workshops up. And I know enough people in both cities to make that happen. It's just, when.
Does it make sense to have Chicago or New York as a hub, per se, for you because of all the flying? And And you've been around the world.
Yeah.
So it's just the bigger airports, the more time-saving.
Yeah.
It's kind of like how songwriters go to Nashville. You are in a city where it thrives. The music that you create, the Gershwin style, pianistic, everything that you put together.
Well, and we're coming up on a huge centennial in 2024 of the creation of Rhapsody in Blue, which was the piece that changed everything in American music. I mean, there's very few things that were not touched musically in this country by that work happening in 1924. So I suspect I will be a very busy boy since I'm supposed to be the guy you call, and it's like you got to have a bat phone for Gershwin. And you got to, it's Rhapsody in Blue, so it's a blue phone, not a red phone. When it lights up, get Kevin.
Yeah, that'd be perfect.
You're the phone call, though, that's made worldwide, man. And I want to know, I mean, you were just talking about Leedsburg and Essexville. You guys are a couple Garber guys here, the Essexville Garber. I come from that lineage myself. I like that, you know?
Well, it's a little interesting, though, because technically I'm not from Essexville. I'm from the south end of Bay City. But because I got involved playing for musicals for Miss Patricia A. Ankney back in the day, 22 years I worked with her.
Yep.
But I Leeds was teaching there, teaching drama and speech and all that stuff. But what's funny is that I was going to All Saints for my high school years until I had my senior year at the Interlochen Arts Academy. And Pat Ankney used to tell the choir and anybody, you leave Kevin Cole alone, because there was that big rivalry, especially football, Garber and All Saints. He's the best thing to ever come out of All Saints. You leave him alone. So, but I jokingly said, I think it was after 20 years of playing for her, I said, I should have gotten a diploma from this place.
Yep.
And by cracky, if she didn't make that happen in the spring concert. So I have the first honorary diploma from Garber High School.
Gary, were you teaching at that time in our school system? Because you were a Garber guy, too.
Well, I taught at Kramer.
Yeah, at the time.
So, I knew Miss Pat, of course, and Leeds, and, I went to all the musicals. My son was very much involved.
He was.
In that.
I was just telling him. He was the lead in Anything Goes that I did the music for. It was the one year Miss Pat wasn't up to doing it. She said, honey, you got to save me. I said, what do I got to do? You got to do the musical director. I'll be there, but I'm just not up to it. And the show was Cole Porter's Anything Goes. And his son was the lead in it.
Brennan, yeah. Brennan was a year ahead of me, and we had Eric Asel and Gary Asel doing all of them in our class. So my best friend was Eric growing up, so I'm familiar totally with the circle you guys are heading in there. Wow, what a crazy time! But so tell us how it all started for you, man. Where did you get this bug to play piano, and how did it take off?
I owe it all to television.
Really?
Which is kind of a weird thing to say. I don't think many people thank television because they think, it's created more ills than good. But, the piano came into the household because my dad's sister, who lived in Detroit, was getting rid of an old upright piano. And she just asked any one of her brothers and sisters, anybody want it? You just got to pay for shipping. And my dad had played piano and had lessons for 3 years growing up, and then switched to trumpet when he went to Central High School and played in the band and orchestra under Wally Kramer, who everyone worked under. And I heard that my dad was a really fine trumpet player, but I never got to hear him play in public, except every New Year's Eve at midnight, he would open the kitchen windows and play taps to kind of get rid of the old year, the death of the old year. The death of the old year. The new year. And then he put the trumpet away, and I wouldn't hear it until the next New Year's. And it was a beautiful tone and all, but he just put it away. And I asked him several times, and he finally told me, I said, well, why didn't you pursue this? He says, well, I thought about going to U of M, music and all that. And there were still some big bands, because my dad got mom married in 1950. But he says, I like to hunt and fish, and I'm not going to give that up for being on the road with the band. And also, you can't raise a family, and I want a family. So he said, so I was hoping one of my boys might take it up. He said, little did I know. I said, yeah, I took it up. So when the piano, the funny part about this was, I was so excited. Our neighbors had a piano, and little kids always gravitate to the black keys, because when you push all the black keys down, they sound good. Put those white keys down, blah, it's horrible. But anyway, so the piano's coming to the household. My folks made the space on the wall for it. And so the truck comes. I think it was Dobson. Pretty sure came from Detroit, and the truck pulls up, brings the bench in. The bench is loaded with old sheet music from 20s and teens and whatnot. And I'm waiting for the piano to come in. The truck pulls away. I'm 4.5 years old. I see the truck pull away, and there's no piano.
Wow.
And I'm sure I started to get teary-eyed. And so my dad said, well, I think they're going to have it on another truck. They didn't have it on the same ship. I went, oh. So that night, I remember sitting on the piano bench, and my feet didn't even touch the ground, and I put sheet music on the floor and did air piano, like I could play. But I was just so waiting for it. So when it came, I started with lessons right away.
How long after that did it come?
Probably 2 days.
Oh, so okay.
It wasn't too bad.
That depression must have been horrible.
It was torture. But I needed something. My folks said the way I reacted to music in the crib or any time it was on, I'm always moving to it, trying to sing to it, even from the age of 1. So they had a feeling that something was going to happen. And so they could have put any instrument in my hand. It just happened to be a piano. I truly believe that. So I just took to it. And my first piano teacher wasn't my aunt, but she was teaching out of Grinnell's and Music Center at the time. And she fancied my mom's brother, oldest brother, who was refinishing pianos for both of those establishments. And they had both been married before, but after 2 years of lessons, they got married. So my piano teacher became my aunt. And that can be good or that can be bad because now it's family, okay? But without going into a lot of stories there, let's just say that after 8 years, which was probably 7 years too long, I went to a teacher at the Holy Rosary Academy, which back in the day, they had a couple of nuns that taught piano there that were quite good. But it was interesting because by that time, I am 12 years old, almost. Yeah, about between 11 and 12. And my first teacher never made me memorize a piece of music, which was really weird. I mean, I could do things by ear, I could improvise, I could do all this stuff. But she never made her students do that, and it used to drive me nuts. Plus, she had almost 100 students.
Wow.
And in those days, she would drive in her car to everyone's house.
Jeez.
My first lesson cost, my mom has the receipt, I think it was $1.50 for 40 minutes.
This is in the 60s, I imagine?
Oh, yeah. And so I'm like, okay. So when I got with the nun, Sister Catherine, at Holy Rosary, she said, well, what would you like to play? Because I had to audition, and my dad took me. And so I remember playing some little bad excerpt, some watered-down classic something or other. But then I played the Glenn Miller hit tune, Elmer's Tune, for her. And she just kind of smiled, but thought there was promise. And that was in September of 71. And in January of 72, she entered me in the Bay Music Foundation Scholarship Competition. And in those days, if you won in your division, there was senior, intermediate, and junior, you get a half scholarship to the National Music Camp at Interlaken for the 8 weeks in those days. So it was the first time I'd entered a serious competition, and I won for my division. I got the highest score. This still cracks me up. Out of 100%, okay, from 3 different judges, I had 96 3/4.
Ooh.
To this day, I'm not quite sure what that 1/4 was. They marked me off on. I don't know. But I went to Locken. But the year prior to that, in 71, I went to Delta College and their music conservatory, and then Interlochen for the summer. But the thing that turned it around for me, as far as my focus, because when I started out with my aunt, it wasn't really classical. I mean, it was, but it wasn't, because she'd get these systems, John W. Schwarm, Pointer system. I mean, and I'd go through all the books, then she'd start me over on another system, and it just was going nowhere. Luckily, my mom would supplement my lessons by putting 100 of the world's greatest waltzers or 200 ragtime pieces, and they just magically appear on the piano rack. And when I'd get done practicing my lesson for the following week, she'd encourage me, and she didn't play, she never studied, but she was just from the kitchen. Mothers can do miraculous things, and she'd say, hey, why don't you play some of those other ones and do your own thing? So she encouraged me to improvise without her really knowing she was doing that. So when I was 7, though, I kept seeing an ad on television for a late-night movie called Rhapsody in Blue. And it starred Robert Alda, Alan Alda's daddy, and Al Jolson, and the original cast of Porgy and Bess, and Oscar Levant, and just a really stellar cast of people who had originated some of these first performances of songs and works of Gershwin. So they knew him, and they're in this Warner Brothers picture from 1945. Well, they're going to show it on a school night. It was a Tuesday night, I won't forget this, at 11:30 at night, and you're in 2nd grade. And in 2nd grade, you go to bed on a school night by 7.
Yeah.
Maybe 7:30 if you beg and plead, all right? So I remember coming home from school, and I told my folks, I said, if I do all, I think I told them at supper the night before, I said, if tomorrow I do all my homework when I come home and I go to bed, would you wake me up at 11:30 to see this movie? And they said, yeah, sure. Without any hesitation. They didn't see any harm in it and all that. And of course, they knew who Gershwin was in Rhapsody in Blue, so they did. Well, I learned years later that the story was pure Hollywood. I mean, it doesn't even come close to Gershwin's life. But the musical numbers were done to perfection because you had the original cast of Porgy and Bess doing things with Porgy and Bess. You had Oscar Levant playing, parts of the concerto. I mean, just Al Jolson singing Swanee. So it really hit me hard. I knew Gershwin's name because my parents had a very eclectic record collection, and I was always stacking them to the point where the tone arm could not land on the album. It would be hitting the side because I put like 12 on, flop, flop. And I was crazy for records. In fact, in the baby book, my mom's, moms keep baby books. Yeah. First this, first that, blah, blah, blah. Well, it's hilarious. My oldest brother, has got this very beautiful, baby book. My second oldest brother, I'm modest. By the 3rd kid, it's like a tablet. It's just like line paper. I said, Mom, she goes, I was over it by the 3rd one. I said, oh, thanks. But she does have in there that the first intelligent word I ever said outside of Mama, Dada was record.
Record.
And I to this day, I say, you're lying. She said, I'm not lying. She said, that was your first full word. So anytime as a kid, most like pennies, drugstores, everybody had records. There'd be a record rack, prescription drugstore on 22nd had a record rack. After church, we'd go there. I'd hold them and you hear the crinkle of the cellophane on it. And we bought a lot of records from that rack, or pennies had them upstairs. So my mom figured out when I was a little kid that if I ever left her side when she'd be shopping downtown Bay City, she learned, I'm not going to worry, I'll finish my shop. He's going to be where the records are. Because the women in the department store say, your son, where's your son? I know where he is. And I'm like 3-4 years old, like, records. And I would just shake looking at records. So anyway, I see Rhapsody in Blue on Tuesday. Saturday is our day to go to the library to get your books for the week. And in those days, there was an adult section and the children's section, young adult. Well, I went right up to the librarian in the adult section and said, do you have any books on Gershwin? And she looked a little surprised because, I'm like this little peanut. And she says, well, just a moment. And she goes and she comes back with a book. And she says, this is called The Gershwin Years by Lawrence Stewart and Edward Jablonski. It's the best book on Gershwin. And did you know that Edward Jablonski is from Bay City, Michigan?
Really?
Well, I'm just like, what?
Yeah.
Somebody from Bay City wrote one of the best books, co-authored one of the best books on Gershwin?
Wow.
So my mom had to check it out. And now I couldn't read all the words because there were some mighty big words in there. But I could there's some wonderful pictures and things in there and captions. So I made a pact with myself. I said, okay, someday I'm going to go to New York and look up Edward Jablonski and tell him that I'm a huge fan of Gershwin. Okay? That's 7 years old. 8 years later, when I'm 15, I make my first trip to New York. I was there to audition for the Tanglewood Summer Festival. Unfortunately, Tanglewood screwed up and told me to come the wrong week.
Oh.
Because what they did, they would have for the younger divisions 1 week auditions at the Baldwin piano showroom, which is like, I think at that time it was like kitty corner from Carnegie Hall. Carnegie Hall. Well, the week they told me to come was for all the undergraduates. And I'm 15 years old. But they still listened to me play. And they said, oh, well, you're really good. And I was playing some of the same pieces the undergrads were playing, but they had already made their choices. Well, anyway, I get checked into the hotel. A friend of the family took me because my dad was working. My mom would never get on a plane. So we're at that time it was called the Americana Hotel in New York, which now I think is the Sheraton, if I'm not mistaken. And the first thing I did, we get in the room, I pull out the Manhattan phone book, and I'm looking up Jablonski, then Jablonski E. There's a whole bunch of them. So I just literally put my finger on one and made a cold call right from the hotel room. And I heard a man pick up the phone, and I go, hi, my name is Kevin Cole. I'm from Bay City, Michigan. I play the piano, and I love Gershwin. And there was this pause and a little bit of a chuckle on the other end. And then we started talking. And within 10 minutes, he said, how long are you in town for? I said, for 5 days. He goes, well, do you have plans for tomorrow night? And I said, no. And he said, well, my wife and I would like to have you over for supper. And I have a little piano here. If you'd like to play it, that'd be great. Bye. So I couldn't wait. The next day, I go, we have supper. And he's got this little Baldwin spinet in his living room. Hadn't been tuned in a while, but I don't care. After supper, he says, would you like to play something? And I said, boy, would I. And now at this point, Jablonski's, the apartment he's living in, which he lived in, I want to say since like 62, and this is 1974. It's at 161 West 75th Street, 75th in Amsterdam. Mm-hmm. Terrific area. So I sit down and play, and at that point, the only Gershwin I played really was a medley of his songs that I improvised into a medley, and his piano preludes number 1 and number 2. So I play those for him. When I get done, Ed Jablonski says something that changes the course of my life. He said, has anyone ever told you, when you play Gershwin, you sound like Gershwin? Now, granted, I am 15 years old. I've never heard Gershwin play. Oscar Levant did the playing for Robert Alda in the movie. And so I'm in my head, I'm going, how old does he think I am? I'm just a kid. So I said, no. He says, well, have you ever heard Gershwin play? I said, no. So he had reel-to-reel tape recordings of radio broadcasts that Gershwin did on a program called Music by Gershwin. The reason Gershwin did this radio show was to raise enough money so he could take the time off to write Porgy and Bess. So this was in the early 30s. One of the best features of his radio program was he not only promoted Gershwin, he would always feature one up-and-coming songwriter. So he was a big promoter for Harold Arlen, for Anne Rennell, who most people wouldn't know, but she wrote Who's Afraid of the Big Bad Wolf and Willow Weep for Me. He'd have these different up-and-coming songwriters on his program and give them a little time to play, to talk, which was fantastic. Yeah. Okay? Because he was, in the early 30s, he was Gershwin. He was a rock star.
Right.
Okay. So I get to hear Gershwin from Ed's playing these tapes, not only play, but I get to hear him speak, which was just like, jaw-dropping. And so Ed, after he played that, he turned to me and he says, don't you think you sound like that? And I had to kind of go, yeah, I guess I do. But how do you do that when you've never heard him play and you're from Bay City, Michigan? Well, there again, how did Ed Jablonski become the world's foremost authority and scholar and biographer of Gershwin from Bay City, Michigan?
Right.
He wrote a fan letter. Basically, it was a fan letter to George, even though George had died in 1937. When Ed was going to Bay City College here, and I think, I want to say maybe he did it when he was going to Central, maybe his junior, senior year. He wrote fan letter to Ira Gershwin, George's brother, who was the lyricist. Basically, telling Ira how much the music of George Gershwin means to him. Okay? Ira responded to this guy in Bay City, Michigan, and they start becoming pen pals. To the point where in 1942, when Porgy and Bess was revived on Broadway, Ed and a buddy of his from here hitchhiked from here to New York to see that Porgy and Bess, and they did it so that they would be there when Ira Gershwin would be there with his wife. Rose Gershwin, George and Ira's mother, would be there.
Whoa.
Oscar Levant and his wife would be there. So Ed got to meet all of these people by going to see that. So they got to meet in person. Well, then the war broke out, and Ed was, I believe, was he in the Army? I believe so. Yeah. But he was in the Pacific arena for that. But he was always writing. He was a journalist, was his thing at Bay City College. But his writing became not only about American composers or others, but mainly American composers, but also about war, he wrote a book about the B-52 bombers, aviation. He just had both of these skills and loves, and wrote books that were equally important in both categories. And that's pretty diverse.
It is.
He even told me that he wrote a children's book about the Blessed Virgin Mary. I'm like, well, if it pays the rent, Ed, I guess. So he was a remarkable person because he's one of those guys that as smart as anyone I've ever met in my life, but you wouldn't know it because he was just so laid back and easy to talk to and non-judgmental. He was pretty incredible. If that is enough of a story, so that statement changed the course of my life.
And you found him with one touch of the telephone book out of all those ones.
But here's the weird thing, and then I'll take a breath so we can go into whatever detour we're going into. So here's why I know this was all meant to be. A year after that meeting in 1975, my grandfather, my mother's father, passed away. Now, my mother's side family is all Polish, as is Ed's family, George Jablonski's. We're at the Ambrose Funeral Home in the south end of Bay City. And I see my grandma, in Polish we call them bushas, my bushas up there talking to this lady. Seems to be a good friend of hers. And I'm sitting with my mom at the funeral home, and my mom's looking, she goes, "Who's that woman that Busha's talking to?" She goes, "I'll be right back." Because my mom's thinking, I've never seen her before. She goes out there. 10 minutes later, she comes back to me. She says, "You're not going to believe this." I said, "What?" "That is Ed Jablonski's mother." I said, "Well, how does she know Busha?" "They grew up together on the farms in Fisherville and were best girlfriends."
Oh, my Lord.
Okay, cue the Twilight Zone music.
Yeah.
I mean, isn't it?
How odd and strange.
Like a year after meeting Ed. I mean, it's just bizarre.
It is.
Little did they know that their son and grandson would form this Gershwin fan club, I guess you call it.
Right out of Bay City.
Yeah.
And take it on. Oh, my Lord.
Yeah.
I got to ask you, before we dive deep into your story, the Ed stuff that he wrote with Ira, the letters, is there anything captured and printed on that or preserved?
Yeah, they're all in the Ed Jablonski collection at the Library of Congress, so anyone can go and see them.
Okay.
Yeah, I have not.
And that reel-to-reel, possibly?
Probably, because his daughter Carla, who lives still in the apartment, which is rent-controlled, by the way, can you imagine? And she had to fight it because they wanted to obviously get him out of there. But she's able to stay there and still pay the rent they paid in 1962.
Doctored. I mean, not doctored, but grandfather clause.
And rightfully so.
Yes.
But anyway, she, after Ed passed away, she put things in a collection for the Library of Congress. And the next time I go there, I was there not too long ago, but the next time I go, I will. But he had showed me some of those, a lot of that stuff. Because his walking to his apartment, his living room area, was, I don't want to say it was a museum because that sounds kind of sterile, but just the things he had on the wall, framed manuscripts, that Gershwin sketches for Concerto and F, or a painting by Irving Berlin, or I mean, just things like this. You just go, oh, because he knew W.C. Handy, he knew Ray Vaughan Williams, he just Aaron Copland. I mean, just well, he wrote the Encyclopedia of American Music, which I see sitting over there. It just the man. But he had a routine, and this anybody who's successful, especially as a writer, you have your routine. He would get up because I used to go and stay with them for weeks at a time in the summer. He had his little office was what used to be the maid's quarters way back in the day behind the kitchen. It's just like this little slip of a closet, but there was enough room for a cot and a chair and a little desk. He used that to write, and every morning he would be, because I would stay in what was his son's room at that time, but his son was already off to college by the time I was starting to visit them. I could hear his typewriter going, because, with the carbon paper behind it, for those who can remember that. I hear it going by about 6:10, 6:15 a.m. And he would type and work until about 11. Then he would stop, go have lunch. After lunch, he'd go Lincoln Center Library, New York Public Library, wherever he had to do a little research for maybe an hour if he needed to. By 3:30, 4 o'clock, he'd be in his easy chair right next to the piano, and he would have poured himself an India Pale Ale, and he'd either be listening to some new recordings that he had been asked to do liner notes for or a review, or he'd be doing some reading of stacks of books or the New York Times, either just for his own knowledge or for something he was working on. And then by 6 o'clock, he'd say, "Are you hungry?" And we'd go out, get something to eat. He'd come home, pour one more ale, and of course, he would pour me a ginger ale when he'd be having an India Pale Ale. But he was always so cool about stuff. Like in the morning when he'd hear me rustle, and get up, maybe I'd be up at 8:30, 9 o'clock, some mornings maybe 10. And they had like swinging doors to these rooms, because I think the bedroom there was a dining room at one time before they turned it into their son's room. But he'd hear me stir, and then he just kind of push the door open and say, "I have donut holes in a box on the cupboard and orange juice in the fridge." And that's what he'd say. And there they would be, So,
unbelievable.
Yeah, he was amazing. And the phone would ring, and you never knew who he was talking to, because it was still Ed talking to him. And then he'd say later, "Oh, yeah, Irving," well, he'd say, "The boss called me." He never called him Irving. He never called him Mr. Berlin. That was too formal. So he started calling him the boss. "Yeah, the boss called me." Long before Bruce Springsteen was the boss. Or Harold Arlen would call him. Or, you never knew who he was going to talk to.
Unreal.
Yeah.
This podcast is sponsored by our friends at Electric Kitsch, located at 2106 Kosciuszko Avenue in Bay City, Michigan. They offer new and used records, including local to Michigan original vinyl and CDs, as well as clothing, electronic equipment, funky household items, music gear, and stringed instrument repair. You can find them on the web or call 989-402-1411.
So he earned enough to move out of Bay City and go to New York on the sales of his book and his journalism, or what was that?
That I'm sure he saved some money from being in the service.
Okay.
Because he met his wife not long after that. But his first job in New York, I believe, was working for the March of Dimes.
Oh.
And while he was going to Columbia too, because he was still continuing his journalistic career, and then started writing. Ironically enough, his wife, the woman that became his wife, Edith Garson, wrote a book about Gershwin before he did.
Really?
Yeah.
What a wild little circle, man.
I know. And he went to them meeting, and he hadn't not written a book about Gershwin yet, and meeting her. But then she went on to work for Women's Wear Daily magazine, and she was lovely, but she died way too soon of an unexpected blood clot that went straight to her heart. One morning, just slumped over her desk, and it just changed everything in Ed's life. Yeah, she was terrific. But
wow,
anyway, yeah,
this is some ironic stuff there. I mean, the details. Wow.
I'd like to take you back when I was teaching at St. Joseph Grade School. When I first started my career, I had kids that were probably about the same age as you were in the 69, 70 school year, would you have been in the 5th grade then?
Oh, let me think about that. In 68, I was in 3rd grade. So...
You'd probably been 4th, maybe 5th grade.
Yeah. So,
And I know the kids that I had were all absolutely crazy about the Jackson 5
oh, yeah.
and the Monkees.
Yeah.
So, here you are, a fan of Gershwin. How did that work with the kids you went to school with, who probably, I'm sure, had never even heard of George Gershwin?
Well, here's the first sign of me being different from the rest. Like, one of these things is not like the other. In 1st grade, the nun I had, Sister Rufine, who became Sister Linda Marie when they could take their real names finally, because some of their names were really hard to say. And I don't know how even the saints that they were named after, they were probably bullied a lot, let's put it that way. Well, I just remember in 1st grade at St. Stan's, one day after a few months of being in 1st grade, she had all of us stand up one at a time. And in those days, they would seat you alphabetically. Mm-hmm. So Cole, C, you're either number 3 or number 4, all right? And all the big Polish names are towards the end. Okay. They're as long as my arm. So she said, okay, today I want everyone to get up one at a time and tell the class what you want to be when you grow up. So the first person gets up and the girl goes, oh, I want to be a nurse. And the next person gets up, I want to be a fireman. And the next one gets up, oh, I don't know, I want to be a doctor. And I get up and I go, I want to be a classical pianist.
Everybody.
And then the nun goes, Kevin, would you like to explain to the class what that is? So, no, excuse me, I didn't say classical pianist. I said a concert pianist. That's what I said. So I tried to explain it, but, you play concerts. You get to travel all over the world. And, and they're just, got one finger in their nose, the other scratching their behind, and they're like looking at me like, okay, we have an alien in the class. The following year, though, in 2nd grade, once everyone knew I could play the piano, in 2nd grade at St. Stan's, they were in the basement. The nuns found out I could play. So every year, from 2nd grade on, a piano magically would appear at the back of my classroom. Not only would it magically appear, except for the one in the basement, it would be on wheels, which meant in 2nd grade, they would pull me out of class twice a week, and I could pick 3 other students to go with me. So they couldn't pick on me too much if they wanted to get out of class for an hour. I would go to both first grades, they'd wheel the piano in, and I would play, and there would be kids that I took with me to lead songs, standing in front of each row of desks, and I started playing. That happened in 2nd grade, then in 3rd grade, then in 4th grade. Now, 5th, 6th, and 7th were up on the 3rd floor. Well, technically, it's the 2nd floor, but there were so many damn steps to get up to the 1st floor. So I'm thinking, I am home free. There's no way they can get a piano up, these giant steps. Oh no, they had a electric cord organ on an AV cart. No, I wasn't going to get away with it.
Oh.
So that's, people just knew.
You were part of the year every year.
I was the one that picked it. The one thing I did always manage to do, though, was not only working on my studies, but whatever the pop music was of the day, like a lot of Burt Bacharach was coming out, and those things you could play on the piano. By the time I was in high school, we're talking Elton John playing Pinball Wizard in the movie Tommy, Billy Joel coming out, and, The Entertainer for the movie The Sting. If I had a nickel for every time I had to play that, Music Box Dancer, I mean, you name it. There were a lot of piano kind of instrumental hits, and I would play them. So that made me a little cooler than normal when I slip those in. And not to say that I didn't get, they weren't waiting for me and beating me up afterwards. Sure, I took my bruises.
Now, the first time I ever saw you, you were in 1776, and you played the courier, and that was a memorable role. Was that the first time you got involved with the Bay City Players, or had you been in things before then?
I actually started in 1973. I was asked to play for a show called Green Sleeves Magic for the youth theater program that had just started. I think it had been around for maybe a year or two. From there, I learned that you could audition for musicals, and they were doing Anything Goes, strangely enough. And so I auditioned for it. And Leedsburg was doing the directing, and Bob Sabrin was doing the music. I knew who Leeds was because I had played for Pat Ankney and Leeds' production of How to Succeed in Business the previous year out at Garber. And so I thought, well, I'll go and audition. And in those days, they would do their musicals at Players in February. So auditions were usually towards November, December of the previous year. Okay. So I go and audition, I sing, I move, but there's no part for a 14-year-old. Well, I was 13, but then I turned 14 because my birthday is January 27th. But Leeds was kind of taken. They said, well, there isn't really a part for him, but he sings, he moves. So I'm going to create the role of cabin boy on the ship for Anything Goes. And so that was the first show I was in. Then the following year, they did 1776. And in 1976, they did The Music Man. So I was in that. So those are the three big shows I did right in a row when I was still in high school.
Wow.
Yeah. And that kind of stuff. Well, see, Bay City Players came into my life because my parents had season memberships since the 60s, early 60s. And they took me in third grade when I was 8. So this is very important because when I was 7, saw this film Rhapsody in Blue that changed the course of what I was doing with my music, with the piano. But then the following year, they took me to see the musical Kismet, which is based on classical music, but it's a Broadway musical, razzle dazzle. And they had a terrific cast for that at Bay City Players and a full orchestra. And it was the first live theater I had seen. And it just, again, wow, that just knocked me out. So much so that when we got home after seeing that, I think that was on a Friday night, I ran to my piano at home and just started playing all the songs I could remember that I just heard in Kismet. To the point where the next day my mom said, did I buy you a book of music that has those songs in it? And I said, no. She goes, well, then how did you play all this? I said, just in my head. Wow. So, I had a really good ear, and that just, again, that music just washed over me. So that Bay City Players, again, wow. Theater and seeing something on TV, those things just, you never know if it hits you at the right time, what it's going to turn on inside of you. Because you have to stop and think, one little known fact about George Gershwin is this. He was not born a musician or a prodigy. Like Mozart, like all these people, the famous ones, they could tell when they were little, oh, look at the way they play, and they're geniuses, prodigies, whatnot. Gershwin, when he was a child, from the ages of, I'll say 7 to 10 or 11, thought any of his classmates that listened to music or played an instrument was a sissy. And he used to beat them up. He was one of those people, and I can relate, that would beat up because, it personal pain. This was Gershwin.
Whoa.
Right? No music anywhere in their family tree, no one in the arts, nothing. Russian Jews that came over, all right? This is Flores people, when they go, what? You gotta be kidding. What happened was this. Somehow, when he, between the ages of 10 and 11, one of his classmates' name was Max Rosen, and he played the violin. How Gershwin ever let this kid became his friend when he knew that he played the violin, it might have been one of those things he thought, I don't ever want to hear you play the violin. I don't ever want to see the violin, but you're my friend. Okay. This is in Brooklyn. And we're talking, this is Brooklyn of 1907, 1908. All right. And Gershwin played street hockey, and he was a roller skate champ, and he was rough and tumble. Well, and his favorite subject, though, was playing hooky. All right. He hated going to school. But one day his friend Max was going to be playing in a school recital. And curiosity got the better of George. He said, I'm playing hooky today, but I'm going to go stand outside the auditorium and hear through the window. I want to hear what he's doing. Mm-hmm. And it was raining, but Gershwin stood outside under the risk of being the truant officer finding him, heard Max play the violin, and he was playing Dvorak's Humoresque, which you would know if you heard it. Mm-hmm. Let's see if I can even go. It goes dum da 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 dum. Well, the thing that hit Gershwin about that is not the beginning of the tune. It's the end of that tune, because it goes dum da dum da dum da dum da dum. There's a blue note, is what we call it. Okay, that blue note turned on something in Gershwin,
Clicked.
like crazy,
Wow.
to the point where he ran to Max's house, whatever flat, and waited for him to come home, because he couldn't wait to talk to him about. He wanted to know how did you do this?
Wow.
So all of a sudden, Gershwin's turned on to music. Max cannot believe it. He thinks Gershwin is just fooling with him, to the point where within a couple of weeks they have an argument. Gershwin says to Max, "I'm going to become, I don't know what it is, but something really great in music." And Max said, "George, you will never do anything in music. You just don't have it in you." Well, George Gershwin got so mad they got in a fist fight. He wouldn't talk to him for weeks. And during that time, George went down the street from where he lived in Brooklyn to, I don't know if it was just a little store or whatnot, but he knew the people that ran it. They had a player piano in their store or restaurant or whatever. He was skipping school, and he would sit at that piano and pump it, as you did, to make the roll go.
Oh, yeah.
As those keys went down, he put his fingers in where the keys are going down, taught himself to play 2 popular songs from those piano rolls. Now,
Memorized it.
he's 11 years old, all right? Mama Gershwin's sister gets a piano, and Mama Gershwin's not about to be outdone by her sister, because having a piano of any type in your household, that was a status thing, right? So she says, she tells her husband, "Morris, we are getting a piano." So it was determined, because they figured George was going to turn into nothing, ne'er-do-well, bum. But Ira was very bookish, 2 years older than George, so he was going to take piano lessons. That's what they determined. The piano comes into the second story flat through the window, gets put up against the wall. George runs to it, sits down, plays these 2 tunes, to everyone's amazement. And they're like, "What? What?" And Mama Gershwin, goes, "Okay." And Ira's like sweating bullets, going, "Oh, good, I don't have to take piano lessons." He's like relieved. Mama Gershwin goes, "George will take piano lessons, and you, Ira, you will take violin lessons." But that's how it started. Can you imagine?
That's crazy.
11 years old. So you never know what piece of music or seeing a piece of art or whatever it is, it's going to turn something on. Like me seeing the movie Rhapsody in Blue.
Oh, my Lord.
That's why it's so important for kids to see everything.
Yeah.
And experience everything, because you don't know.
I'm blown away too by your parents had music everywhere, and you're like, go to the music. You did it from early ages. They're like, they just gave it to you because they knew it was maybe safe also, but also you cared about it. And then same with Gershwin, even it's like once he had something going on, he was able to track right to it. His family had enough funds to bring that into the household, obviously.
Yeah.
And
well, my mom would worry about me eating, because I'd rather play than eat. They never have to tell me, "Go practice piano." I'd rather sit there and play. I mean, it took on its own human qualities. It became my best friend. Just
extension of your body. Yeah.
Absolutely. It's still to this day.
Yeah.
Pianos are, they have a personality. They're either male or female. And if you ask me, how do I know? How do I know if a piano's male or female? We just look underneath at the pedals. Come on. Jeez.
Now, did you have a piano growing up?
Yeah. Well, I had.
Because Jason told me you would go to Lenore Nixon's.
Yeah. Well, she had a nice little Kawai, smaller grand, and then of course anything you can play on a grand piano. Okay. But what going over to her house, a lot of it was we were working on shows, because by the time I was in junior high, I was already playing for musicals, and so you got to know the other people who played for musicals. And little did I know that my English teacher at All Saints, in my first year of having her as my honors English teacher, we'd both be playing for Pat Ankney at Garber for Godspell, keyboards, and then for stuff at Players. And so it was, you had to keep that professional. And then I'd see her in school, the next day, and I'm 15, 16 years old, and she's Mrs. Nixon, but, I'm playing shows at night with her. So, it was an interesting thing, but.
So you didn't meet Pat through Leeds? You met her through Lenore Nixon?
How I met Pat Ankney, it's very interesting. Once I won that scholarship to go to Interlaken for the summer, June, July, August of 1972, that fall, the Bay Music Foundation, one of their big money raisers was doing all-city musicals that Pat Ankney would direct. And Peg Rowley, of course, was in charge of Bay Music Foundation. So that fall, they were doing the musical Mame. And it was open to any kids, high school-age kids. But also, I think they allowed some junior high, because I thought, Bay Music Foundation, I won that scholarship, but I should do, here I am, 13 years old, I should give something back. Okay, so I go and audition for Mame out at John Glenn. That's where they're doing it. And I didn't know Pat Ankney, never met her or anything. And she, she's a force of nature, of course. And I auditioned, and she cast me. I was in the ensemble. I played a lot of different roles. In fact, in one of the big opening scenes, she had the baby grand put on wheels, and I played, and she had some little flappers sitting on the piano. And it was kind of a neat trick, because I was really playing what the orchestra was playing, this big number called It's Today, as they wheeled me around. Another number, she knew I could kind of move and dance, so she had me up on a big spool that you'd have for copper wire or whatever in a barn dance thing. And so I had a lot of different roles, but that's how I met her. And then she said, "Hey, come and play for my choirs." I'm not even in high school yet. So that's how that connection happened.
Wow.
No, she was at Garber at that point. Then,
oh, yeah.
Right? Yeah, okay.
Yeah, because she was band teacher is what she started out at Kramer. And then the opening came for a choir teacher at Garber, and she grabbed it and just built it up and built it up. But I mean, she went through a lot to get that program built into what she did. And some people wouldn't agree with her method sometimes, but I will give her this. One of the big things she wanted to prove was that the arts are as important as the sports. And she did it. Good, bad, or indifferent. Mm-hmm. It was a sign of very prestigious to be in those musicals, as it was to play football or basketball or whatnot. And a lot of times she had some of the star athletes in her shows, and she would tell the coaches, she said, they are going to have to miss a few practices because my practice is just as important. And boy, the coaches they did not like that. They'd see her coming. I think her size, that she was kind of a mighty mite, just substantial in girth. Yeah. I think that was good, because when she'd go nose to nose with some of these coaches, there were people.
Oh, I bet.
But we'd laugh. Years later, when she retired, I talked to her about once a month from Chicago. And, after 22 years working with somebody, you get to know them. And so we'd be reminiscing. I said, remember the time you said, and I go, blah, blah, blah. And I could kind of imitate her voice. And she'd laugh. She goes, honey, did I really say that? I said, yeah. She goes, I was awful, wasn't I? I said, yeah, you were. Yeah. But it was fun, wasn't it? She goes, yeah, it kind of was. So, it's in my life, it's really interesting, because when you can do something really well at an early age, you're thrust among people much older than yourselves. And you either can talk to them and have some sort of relationship from that age, or you just use your music as the connection. My parents could talk to anybody on the planet, and they're good storytellers. And I feel fortunate that I think I got some of that pixie dust, because I never had a problem talking or working with people much older than I was. In fact, many times I felt more comfortable because they really related to the music I was playing from here, from the 20s, 30s, 40s, 50s, things that way beyond. I shouldn't understand them like I do, because my own exposure to them was through my parents' record collection or watching movie musicals on TV. I remember seeing my first film musical. Actually, my first film that I remember seeing was at the State Theater. It was The Music Man. Came out in 62, but I have a feeling we didn't get it till 63, or it was right around the turn of the year. The theater, State Theater, was packed. The only seats we could have, my mom, my dad, myself, I think my brothers were there too, and I'm 4 years old. I had to stand on my dad's leg to see over the heads from the back row was to see The Music Man, and that was a wonderful first musical film to see, because it still holds up today. So. Yeah, again, you cannot, I don't even want to say the word expose is just not right. You have to let your children experience these things, whether you know where it's going to lead to or not.
Right.
Because you'll see the light bulb go off. And my folks knew something was up, like I said, the way I reacted to music. So you just have to watch what turns on the light in your kid's eye. It may be something that you don't have any interest in, but don't squash it, until you let the kid explore it. And also tell young people that you can have multiple careers.
Yeah.
If you choose something and it works for 10 years and then you lose interest, choose something else. But for so many years you were told, no, if you're going to study engineering, if you're going to become a teacher, you better stick to it no matter what. And so we have a lot of miserable people. You don't just divorce people, you can divorce work.
Yeah. Right. Yeah, good point.
As long as there's a good settlement, that's like
take it as far as you can go with it.
Yeah.
So where did you go on to school, and Kevin, did you major in music? Or?
Well, here's what happened to me, and it was a little bit of a curveball, because the teachers, as I grew and got better and better teachers, they were grooming me more for the classical world because I had the fingers, the chops to do it. And competitions don't bother me. I enjoy playing for people, and just go and do it. So by the time I got to Interlochen Arts Academy for my senior year of high school, it was a terrific year, but it was a little bit mind-blowing because you have people from all over the world, and they're all very, for the most part, not everybody, but I would say a good 50% of the people that go there really excel at their age of 15 to 18 at what they do, and they already have the path. But here's the interesting thing. Of the 7 piano majors, my senior year up there, and I only went for 1 year. There were kids that could afford to go 4 years, which it's like going to college now. 2 years, 3 years, 4 years. I could only 1, and I had to do a lot of fundraising here my junior year to make Interlochen happen. But of the 7 people who were declared piano majors there, I'm the only one that has had a big concert career. And yet, I wasn't the one that they all went into classical music. I did not. I went into concertizing, but American music.
Oh.
So it's just interesting because...
Now, did you do that in college, though, or...?
Well, here's the thing. I did not go to college.
Oh, okay.
The thought was, of course, I sent in all in those days, cassette tapes to all the different schools. Manhattan School of Music, Juilliard, USC, U of M, and there was one other one. Send them all in. And I was accepted at, I think, just about every one of them. I did not go and do live auditions other than for the Manhattan School of Music, because there was a teacher there that I wanted to study with, Robert Goldsand, who had been a pupil of Rosenthal, who was a pupil of Franz Liszt. So his lineage was like solid. But he also played more American music than any other foreign-born pianist at the time. But I had heard him. He came to Interlochen to perform. He was from Vienna. Well, he was a refugee, basically. His whole family was wiped out during the Holocaust years there, and came with music under his arm and showed up in Manhattan. But just played beautifully. And that big, grand style of playing that was around the late 1880s into the turn of the century, which is kind of like Rachmaninoff. It's just that very romantic, big, virtuosic playing, and which apparently is my calling. So the thought was that I'd go and study with them in Manhattan. Well, Manhattan School of Music, I don't know how it is now, but they don't have dormitories. It's not like a university. You have to have an apartment or live in New York with a bunch of people and figure that out. there was just no way right out of Interlochen 18 I could figure that one out. My folks were poor. And the other thing is I'd have to hold down 2 or 3 jobs in order just to live there, let alone try to figure out that schedule plus studying. So what I did was I studied with him for about 6 months, staying on people's couches. Stayed on Jablonski's couch, other friends of mine from Interlochen that were going to Juilliard, who had much better trust funds than I did. And I just studied privately with him and then came back to Michigan. But in 79, a teacher from Interlochen, because I was going back up to Interlochen to accompany and work with students, even though I wasn't on their faculty, I was unofficially helping a lot of their students. But one of the teachers up there, Mrs. Jones, Mary Jones, I know it sounds like John Doe, but Mrs. Jones, well, I had taught voice at both U of M and Michigan State, and she said, well, you know what? Why don't I arrange an audition for you at Michigan State? Because Joe Evans was teaching there, and he's somebody I would have liked to have studied with. And I said, okay. So I had to audition. I remember this. They wanted me to be a triple major, so I had to audition in voice, piano, and organ, which I did. And I got accepted, but I just put the pause on that. And I said, no, I don't think I should be in Lansing. So I just started freelancing and building up my own reputation, especially for Gershwin or anything American music, with orchestras in the Midwest. And then conductors would talk to each other, oh, you should get Kevin, and blah, blah, blah. So it just kind of caught on from there, but there was no agents, there was no promoter other than me.
Wow.
The MMHP is hosted on Apple, Spotify, YouTube, and our own Libsyn podcast site. You can also search MMHP989 on Facebook for up-to-the-minute information, as well as both Dr. J and Sir Fred's album picks of the week, posted every weekend. You can connect with Scott on the web at scottbakermusic.com, Dr. J at michiganrockandrolllegends.com, Sir Fred at fredrife.com, and the Electric Kitch at electrickitch.com.
This podcast wouldn't be here without special help from Studio 163's Alan Garcia, our podcast videographer and wingman, Mr. Mike Beatty, MMHP tagline specialist, Mr. Eddie Switek, and of course, Gary Johnson, Fred Rife, the Electric Kitch, and all of our special guests, and especially you listeners. We want to thank you.
You've been listening to the MMHP and the 989.